Welcome to part number one of our breakdown of The Orchard Keeper. So I am super excited to do this today, and we'll be covering part one in this video, pages 1 through 48 in the Vintage International Edition. I'll be talking about the prologue in a separate video because I'm scouring some of my Cormac McCarthy secondary sources to find a breakdown of the prologue that I read 2 or 3 years ago that I really liked. And I know what my theory is has nothing on what this scholar connected. So a lot of people struggle with The Orchard Keeper and this very first part. I remember I first did. When I first read this in high school, I had no idea what was going on at the start because there are these switches between the characters. So we have two characters at the start. We have Kenneth Ratner and Marion. I'm just gonna call him Marion. Maybe we could call him Marion Sylder, but we'll just call him Marion for now. And so our story starts off with Kenneth Ratner, and Ratner is hitchhiking toward Knoxville. And at some point, he's not having too much luck with the hitchhiking. So we see him walk into a convenience store and buy a tire pump. And seemingly that's what this looks like. And he's saying that he wants the old school edition. So this more looks like a new school edition. And it is this kind because he says he wants one where you have to go up and down, that there's a new kind that you can go like this with, but he wants the old school one that's longer. And this seems like a good weapon. We know that's what he's going to be using it for. It's pretty good. Something that you can find. You can't find, I guess that many things at the store that can be used as a blunt force object. Okay, and it's very odd because on page 10 of the novel, we have a break. We have a break right here where it says transfer to Marion. And there is no really, we have a paragraph break, and this one is pretty good because had he been asked his name, he might have given any, but Kenneth Ratner, which was his name. And then we are transferring in the middle of a chapter to another character's POV. And, what's interesting about the introduction of Marion is that it's a lot different. When we see the first paragraph about Ratner, it's very dark, no one's picking him up. He's an ungainly bird. Let me get rid of this tire pump. But with Marion, we get this very nice introduction. East of Knoxville, Tennessee, the mountains start. And we have these beautiful descriptions of the land. This is some of McCarthy's, honestly, some of the better stuff that he's ever done. And so there is this connection. And even though Marion is a little bit, he's a harsh individual, he's not the embodiment of evil such as Ratner is. And that's what we're going to be kind of playing with here, that Marion is a criminal. He's hardened. He's kind of this embodiment. He's embodying this new lifestyle, this new criminal mindset. But Ratner is the embodiment of that. And so we get this nice introduction. And before we even get to really know about Marion, we're already getting some historical context. So we know that at age 16, he leaves this ephemeral world that we're talking about here. And I think that's why we're seeing these glances of this idea that this, you could say, is the backstory. Because right here we get the story of when Sylder is 13. It was a much different place in 1913 when he was born there. And this was the type of place. This was the type of place where you could experience nature and run around. And school wasn't very important to him, so he starts working construction when he is 16 years old. And him going to work for Increase Tipton is that move into this new world. It's the first move into a cash society, into the economy, because in this area at this time, there are a ton of people who are existing outside of that, who are just bartering. Look at Cornelius Sutry just fishing. There are all these still mountainous people living out where the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is, and around there who don't even have work. And he's actually servicing those people. He is working on these shanty homes for these displaced mountain people. And what do you see out with displaced mountain people in Tennessee? Well, one of the major themes of that area is moonshining, of creating liquor. So obviously with Prohibition, and then after Prohibition, just kind of the limitation, taxation of whiskey, Knoxville being dry. Knoxville was a dry city. Marion seems to be sympathetic to bootlegging and understand it. Like this seems at the time where it probably starts to enter his consciousness a little bit. And so even though we don't get the overtness of some of the other characters, Arthur Ownby, protesting against the government, and John Wesley rejecting the hawk bounty, we could also say that Marion exists in a very similar but more overt rebellious light. Something that I've kind of put together is it feels more like something we would see like with a mafioso. Like this guy cares about the area, he cares about his neighbors, but he doesn't care about bending some laws or even hurting some people to get away with it. Why does he not, call the police about the body? Why is he just dropping the body? And so an interesting note is the inspiration for Marion. And the inspiration seemingly for Marion is Francis Marion, Brigadier General Francis Marion, also known as the Swamp Fox, who is a hero for in the South. Let me make him a little bit smaller. And Marion was a commander in the Southern Theater of the American Revolutionary War, and he was really well known for his guerrilla warfare tactics. So this connection may be a little bit of a reach, but with Tennessee being so close to South Carolina, and a lot of that mythology still being very big at the time of McCarthy's upbringing, the American Revolution, they really only had, they didn't have even World War II yet. I guess they had World War I. This would have been a figure instrumental to McCarthy's, early childhood. However, another thing we need to talk about at the start of the novel, I mean, I guess we can roll through all of this, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but I guess I just want to focus on Marion, is that he has the car, right? He leaves for a little bit and he comes back and he has this car. And that shows how he's also changed, how he's also not an Ownby or a John Wesley or one of these individuals. He has gone, he has done these criminal things, and he is integrating with the new world. And what happens with the scene with the girls, right? We see this scene with these young ladies. And after these bootlegging runs, they pick up these girls. They're basically stalking these girls and getting them in these cars so that they can lure them into sex. And, seemingly it seems somewhat consensual. But, one of the main things that I saw with this is that one of the girls wets herself, right? She's so scared by how fast the car is moving and whipping around. And today, this wouldn't shock us at all. I mean, if we were in a car going 60 miles an hour, it's kind of crazy. But just kind of the rage and the speed to someone who's, probably a backwoods woman is pretty crazy. So this is maybe seeming a little bit more on the, I don't want to say rapey side, but yeah, seemingly coercing people and scaring them. If you coerce someone and scare them, they're going to be much more opportune to want, and they're going to be more defenseless because they think that you are the car is an extension of you and your power, and what are they going to do to you? And the language that they are using, I needled her, is very interesting, because I know there's always different terminology, but I just know that that's a bad one. And if we also look at the sex scene that happens in this section of the novel, they have sex in an outhouse while he's sitting on the toilet, and they're very shocked at this. So it's they are just, using women and going through this and just, being kind of these outrageous figures. So we're not dealing with, I'm not trying to sit here and romanticize this guy either. I mean, these guys are sharks, but, that I guess was very common back then. So now returning back, we see Marion, and he comes back after 5 years. He has his car, and he goes to the Green Fly Inn. And this Green Fly Inn place just seems like a lean-to, right? It just seems like some shoddy lean-to built on a tree. It just seems like this very odd place. And McCarthy takes time to describe it and give it life. On such night, the inn-goers trod floors that waltzed drunkenly beneath them, surged and buckled with huge groans. At times, the whole building would career madly to one side, as though headlong into collapse. Remarks alluding to the eccentricities of the inn were made only outside of the building. To them, the inn was animate as any old ship to her crew, and it bred an atmosphere such as a few could boast, a solidarity due to largely its very precaciousness. The swaying, the incessant small cries of tortured wood created an illusion entirely nautical, so that after a violent wrench, you might half expect to see a bearded mate swinging through a hatch in the ceiling to report all rigging secure. So this Green Fly Inn is, building on the mythos of this area and the integration of these individuals there. And Marion still fits in, even though he comes back and he shows up and it feels weird because everyone's like, who is this rich guy? What is he doing? Once they recognize it's him, he starts buying drinks for everyone. Everyone seems to like him. He seems to be well liked by the community, and he's sharing some of his wealth. And so now we start to see, as we're moving forward with all this, that there are these little dots to, let me see if I can show you right there where it says transition to Ratner. These start to signal the transition points. And McCarthy didn't do this in the initial draft. He didn't have these dots, which it seems okay because we now see Win Ratner. The next passage starts as Win Ratner. So I don't know if that one was necessarily needed, because now we should remember the difference between Ratner and Marion if we're told. So this is an interesting scene. So we have him at this gas station in the first section, and he meets this trucker who was like, all right, I'll take you. Excuse me, I was a trucker. It was a man in a car. And so now we see him with this gash in his leg limping back toward the road. And so, you kind of have to ask yourself what the hell happened, because we are told that he has his wallet and he throws the wallet away with pictures and all these different things. So it's probably not his wallet. It's probably not photos of John Wesley and whatnot. Seemingly he robbed this other man. He robbed this other man, and the guy maybe fought back, and he has this gash in his leg. And we're told this because he said he had left Atlanta at 10. It could not be past midnight. So sometime in these 2 hours, he'd basically robbed this guy. And this is starting to show us this guy is actually evil. Like I said, a little bit before, we're getting a little bit of foreshadowing, but now seemingly he just committed a murder or did something very bad. And he's just kind of tromping through this area. And that's all we get, though. And then we transition back once again with the ... dots. And we transition back to Marion, and we start to now realize that he's bootlegging. The little coupe could be seen leaving or entering the Seidel place at strange hours or in the heat of the day. And he's being nice, though. He gives boys rides in the car to the place, and he's saying that they're going to, when they ask how fast does it go, he says they plan to take one over to the Sahara Desert to find out. At the market, he would pull up to the curb and tell them all to get in, and 8 of them would run up and crawl in the car. And we also get an illusion here also, that's very interesting. We hear kind of getting him being this liquor man, but we also see Sundays the Knoxville beer taverns were closed. So in Knoxville, only beer was served until the 1960s. It was a beer town, it was a dry town, and there was no alcohol served. So that's just a note to Suttree, that in Suttree things are, all these kind of places that Cornelius Suttree is haunting are, seedy places that are technically illegal. But on Saturday, the Green Fly Inn was open. A lot of places, even to this day, if you're in Utah or other places, it's not open on Sunday. So he would go to the mountains to join what crowds marshaled there beyond the dominion of laws, either civil or spiritual. So I think that's what McCarthy is really trying to show us here, is this kind of dark area of Tennessee. And it's like, why would he do that? So we have this lawyer's son who is a gifted individual. He goes to university, he goes to the Air Force, and everyone's like, this is autobiographical. But this is something that we all fantasize about. This is always the easy pickings. They always say, like, mob movies are always in, right? These, criminal stuff is always in. And that is true here. Like, even though McCarthy's taking a very symbolic and big role here, that's what this is. This is like McCarthy, almost, you could say, examining some of the more intriguing stuff that any child sees. You would hear about these whiskey runners and all these different things. And McCarthy, most likely, really wasn't in that world. Like, even when he was in Knoxville during the first stint, he was a university student. Like, if you're a university student and you went to a nice school and your dad's a lawyer, like, you only can get so deep into it. Like, I know he tries to personify himself in Cornelius Suttree as this individual that is, like, rejecting everything, but he then, not really, because he then goes and joins the Air Force. And in his second stint at the University of Tennessee, he meets his first wife pretty fast into that tenure and is, shacked down with her. So, like, I can't imagine during that tenure that he's hanging out with bootleggers, at least at that much of a level. However, I've heard from, multiple scholars and people who were friends with him at that time that have now been been taught to, that he was kind of into that scene, that he lived south of Knoxville in the mountains, and that there'd be these parties. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to, like, backwoods parties with the weird people. When I was living in Oregon, that happened all the time, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what these backwood mountain people were doing, with psychedelics and drinking, and it was just rampage. I mean, I'll tell you guys a quick story really fast about backwoods parties. The first one I ever went to, I show up and I'm just drinking way too hard. I was playing these, like, mind games, riddle games with this Native American kid, and I always beat everyone I ever played, but this kid just would kill me. Like, I was so drunk, and and it's at this kid named Toothless Jesse's house. He had no teeth on the top row, and there's a stripper pole in the house, and this Toothless Jesse guy is married to a stripper, and he has 3 kids with this chick, and they're all running around, and all her stripper friends are there. And she starts saying something to Jesse. I don't know what she says, but I'm watching them talk. And then I see him grab her head and smash it into the wall, and she falls down. He, like, knocks her out, like domestic abuse type stuff. And she falls down, and then only one other girl sees it, and she runs up to the girl and is, like, helping her. And then when that girl wakes up, they go and tell all of her other stripper friends, and they corner Toothless Jesse in the kitchen. And no one knows what's going on, but I'm just like blackout drunk, like, oh my God, what's happening? And Toothless Jesse starts feeling cornered, and he just starts doing the Vanderlei Silva hooks. He just starts hooking, and he starts knocking out all these strippers. And he knocks like 5 or 6 out, and then the whole party like erupts into a brawl, and just is like, it's wild. Some of these stories are, and these people, I've never experienced anything like that anywhere else. But once you're out in the woods and it's weird, and you're miles, over an hour or 2 hours away from a city, things start to get wild. So then we get the scene with the girls, right? Tipton and Marion, they pick up the girls, and I think there's a guy with them, and they're driving them around. Not too much to say about that. This is just him flexing. This is the flex of power back then. I mean, this is, if we just want to talk about, as I talked about in the historical context video, this is the start of the machine and man, and this whole group of people, whoever they are, have never really encountered this before, especially a muscle car, a car that goes fast. And it has this godlike energy to it. I mean, that's what cars even today have. That's what the transportation era has done for us. It gives us this energy, and just what a weird time to be alive. Like, this is still true in Appalachia today. There's still a lot of interbreeding, and it's really backwards, and like a lot of people still live without cell phone service, without running water, just living on the land, still doing that whole lifestyle. And it gets real weird. But back in the day, that was the norm. If you were going to pick up some random girls during this era, unless they were rich, they were never going to be exposed to these types of things. So during this section, we get right after this section, excuse me, we get an introduction to Arthur Ownby for the first time, one of the three main characters, you could say, of our novel. And Arthur Ownby is a much older man. He is the orchard keeper. And one of the themes that kind of comes up, I've never heard really talked about, is, Arthur Ownby's kind of weird. He's kind of voyeuristic. Like, he's always watching. And I guess that's somewhat of this time, right? Like, suddenly we have these roads and these cars. And this is the same with like my grandparents. My grandparents live in a small town in Utah, and they have this very nice old house, and they sit on the front porch every night, and they just watch the cars go by, watch random stuff happening, and they sit on their back porch, and there's a park right behind them, and they look at the going-ons at the park. And I think that it's kind of a somewhat typical thing to be curious about what's going on when you're old, especially pre-technology. Like, what are you going to do? And now there's all this action going on. But this is very early on, and it seems that Ownby is highly curious, because his curiosity is the core of, like, at some level, a lot of the plot of this novel. So let's read the introduction of Ownby, because I think, like, as we're seeing, like, these introductory parts are important, because McCarthy is very vague, and he hides stuff in here. Like, that's what I learned when I studied the drafting process of this, that he added a lot here, because before there were, like, he was giving these small markers about how, like, time was passing and all this that he thought that we were all going to catch, but most of us probably just read right through it. So we'll just read this to make sure that there's no hidden nuggets here. From his porch, Arthur Ownby had watched them pass, and now he heard the slam of the car door up the road where they had stopped. So he's very close to this bootlegging action, like, and that's obviously, this is very important, because we know that Marion knows the area very well, and that's where seemingly he does a lot of the drops. There's a tripartite connection here, because Ratner, he kills Ratner, and he dumps the body there because he knows the area very well. He drops off a lot of the stuff, but then one night when he leaves, he crashes the car, and then Wesley finds him, and Wesley is somewhat in with, I think he's somewhat in with Ownby, and he introduces Marion to him, and then kind of the whole connection party starts. So it had begun to rain. A yellow haze in the woods flicked out. He could hear low voices, near sounding on the warm night air. With one foot, he tapped out the time of some old ballad against the corner post of the porch. From under the brim of the roof, he studied the movements of the stars. A night for meteors tonight. A cannonaded the towering hump of Red Mountain. Rain falling now from a faultless sky. A girl's laugh on the road. He remembered her sitting high on the wagon seat Sunday morning, that the mule broke wind in his ear while he unhooked the single tree and stove 2 fingers in on a rib, and it never even flinched. Late hours for an old man. Arthur Ownby had watched from his porch. He dozed. And so this is actually very important, because we're seeing that he's reminiscing. He's kind of got some faults. I mean, this is what everyone does, but he's listening, and he's being contrasted with the stars, the faultless sky. And this girl's laugh sends him into some sort of remembrance. Is he remembering these girls? Were these girls sitting on the wagon seat, or is this something else? And I think it's something else, because it says late hours for an old man. Arthur Ownby had watched from his porch. He dozed. He's kind of slipping in and out. This is somewhat normal. However, we're also introduced right here. This is such an important paragraph to seemingly Wesley. When the boy came past on the road, he looked up at the house on the side hill, dark and abandoned looking. He could not see the old man, and the old man was asleep. So seemingly we're getting an introduction to all the characters here. And at this point, he's a boy. But, I think as time moves on and as we get close, there are some time shifts happening here where he grows up into more of a teenager. And so now, I mean, this is, I think, a good time. We're in the course. I mean, this is just something I'd like to hear your thoughts on or just to contemplate. I mean, so McCarthy's using the N word, and I just never use the N word just for any context, even if I'm reading. I just, I don't really think it's that useful to use. And like, as time goes on, it just becomes more out of fashion, which is fine. I don't really care. But McCarthy seemingly uses this word a lot. And what's interesting is that he uses it, you could say, okay, we have these Southern characters, and I'm not trying to paint McCarthy as a racist or any of that, but but hear me out. He in all four of his Southern novels, he drops the N-bomb. And then as we move forward, I was like, okay, when I was rereading it all, his novels like 2 months ago, I reread them all, and it's like, okay, does he need to be doing this? Maybe, but okay, we're moving forward. He's being authentic. And then I get to Blood Meridian, which is taking place in Texas and New Mexico with mostly white people, native indigenous people, and Mexicans. And he's still dropping. The N-bomb's still getting dropped. So I'm like, I don't know if McCarthy even cares. I don't know if that just seemingly it's common to him. It's seemingly at this time with these people that the N-word was just dropped. I mean, that's obviously pretty common because we hear about that in a lot of the older movies, even Disney movies. Maybe not Disney, but like a lot of these older movies and texts, like people were very free willy with this. But McCarthy was writing this in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s. So, I mean, but on top of this, like, I don't really feel like it's racist. I don't feel like he is a racist because that area of Knoxville, as I talked about in the historical context video, is not known for that. They didn't fight in the Civil War. They protested both sides. They didn't have slaves in that area because of the small farms. Like, slavery really wasn't a thing in that area. And McCarthy's family moved from Rhode Island. They were seemingly a family not of Southern descent. However, I don't know, and with these characters, I don't know if McCarthy kind of got into the Confederate mythos, like if he's tied up in that. I'd like to, I've seen, obviously people, this is a big topic like that people argue, but like seeing that he uses Francis Marion as a character name, even though who was a slave owner. He was a Southern slave owner. And I don't know. This is something that I just want to explore, but this is the first time that the N-word gets dropped in a Cormac McCarthy novel when they're talking about the shit house. They don't call it the shit house, though. They call it the N-word house, where Tipton had sex with this girl. So now we have one of these transition switches. So if we look right here, once again, we have these paragraph breaks usually mean that. So now we're back to Ratner, on page 22. So we are now told that Ratner has been gone for around a year. So he has these two, he has a son and a wife, and they moved from Maryville up to Red Branch. Let me show you guys where Maryville is. This is somewhat important. So Maryville is down here. So we have Maryville. I'm just trying to make sure that you guys can see. And then if we zoom out, Red Branch is up here. So we have Red Branch up here. So it's a little bit northeast of this. And this is where a lot of the plants and factories were open. And this took a lot of people away from Knoxville and this general area down to Maryville. So today this is about an 18-mile drive. I'm sure the road is somewhat similar. So this is a decent 28 minutes. So this is a similar amount away from Red Branch, and for people without cars, this seemingly is a very big transition, a very big journey. And he moves up there, and it seemingly may be a downgrade because he has to live in this abandoned log house with his wife and child. And he leaves them for a year, and he leaves with all the money, seemingly $26, and he's gone. And so he says he leaves because of this incident at the Greenfly Inn. So there is this guy, F. Hobie, who gets out of prison for 18 months later for bootlegging. And that's what this whole italicized scene. I love how McCarthy just starts going italic on our asses, like to tell these old stories. And it feels very interesting. And at some point during this celebration, which attracts a bunch of people, the place collapses basically. There's just this massive collapse of it, and a bunch of people are getting smashed. And Kenneth Ratner is there. And seemingly, while all this was going on, the reason that Ratner has to leave is that he while all this was going on, was taking people's money, was beating them up, taking their pants, and taking their money from them. And so he has to boost out of town. He got the $25 or whatever, and so he has to leave because people are looking for him. They know who he is. And so this really ends the first part of part one. Now we're going to kind of transition into part number two. And this is, just my general thoughts on this. It's a very good opening, and you have to be very slow reading it to really start to understand that. If you read this fast, you may not even know that there's bootlegging going on. You may just be like, what the heck is going on? There's this guy's driving around. There's guys buying things. Like, you can't anticipate that something's going to happen here. But if you read it slowly, then it really starts to come together and really be beautiful. When you see how McCarthy uses tonality to kind of introduce different characters and different, that are going to be important for the rest of the novel, then you can see how masterful it is. And it maybe was written for a time when there were closer readers, people who weren't scanning, smart individuals. Because now, when I look at Reddit, I'm always like searching and seeing how people react to McCarthy's novels and stuff. A lot of people have a very hard time with The Orchard Keeper, and I remember reading something saying that rereading this book is very rewarding. Like, that's where the magic's in the reread with this McCarthy novel. So let's transition to part number 2.